Do these instead of barbell deadlifts. Now, I know that title's a little bit clickbaity, but I had to get your attention somehow. So what we're actually going to be doing today are some alternatives for if you can't barbell deadlift because you experience some back pain. Now, if you're anything like me, I've had some minor issues with back pain since I was about 16 years old, some old rugby injuries. I can't really deadlift that much, or when I do, I just need to be really careful about what kind of variations of deadlifts that I use and how I increase load over a number of weeks. So these are alternatives that will work your glutes and work your hamstrings in a similar pattern, that hip hinge pattern to doing deadlifts, but will allow you to avoid some pain at the same time. So come follow along if this sounds like you, if you experience some back pain and you just want some options to grow your glutes and hamstrings without experiencing back pain. But before we do, I just want to quickly mention that my glutes and hamstrings guide and 8-week training plan is out now. Head to the link in the description where you can download my complete guide on glutes and hamstrings training, the special exercises that you need to refine your glutes and hamstrings development, as well as an 8-week training plan developed by me, written by me, periodized, and will allow you to see some great progress over 8 weeks, okay? So head to the link in bio if you want that, head to the link in description if you want that, or if you want to come and see some cool exercises, have a look at what I've got in store for you today. Let's check it out. First exercise. Okay, so kettlebell Romanian deadlift. As I said, this allows you to keep the load really close to your body. So because of the design shape of the kettlebell and where I hold it, it allows us to keep that load really close inside our thighs. I can sit my hips back, sit into those glutes and hamstrings, weight on my heels, and you do not need to be going light with these. These are not a beginner's exercise. I've seen 100 kg kettlebells out there. Most people will struggle to lift that. You can be training for years and years, and I would challenge you to be able to Romanian deadlift with that 100 kg kettlebell. So kettlebell deadlifts are a really good option if you can't barbell deadlift, but you want to load your hips with an exercise that's challenging enough while also minimizing stress through your lower back. I'm going to show you another, what I think is an easier option than a barbell deadlift next, by keeping the load close to your body. All right, next up, modified dumbbell deadlifts. Now, I regard modified versions of dumbbell deadlifts as actually a slightly more lower back friendly version of a barbell Romanian deadlift. Now, what you get with dumbbells is the ability to keep it close to your thighs. So unless you have really thick thighs, what you can do is this, I'll show you. So the dumbbells allow you to keep your palms really close to your thighs. So the modification really is just having the dumbbells slightly wider than out in front and just having them slightly more by your sides. So you can then trace your palm down your thighs. And again, it just allows you to keep that load a little bit closer to your body versus a barbell Romanian deadlift. So again, that's another great option. The downside to dumbbell Romanian deadlifts is that most gyms probably cap out at maybe like 100 pounds, 50 kgs-ish dumbbells, depending on your gym. Some of the more hardcore gyms, you can get slightly heavier dumbbells, but that tends to be the heaviest weight you can find. Now, obviously, you're not capped by that limit when you're using a bar. So if you're too strong for dumbbells, then they're just no longer an option. And then you're almost kind of stuck in a corner where you need to be using a barbell. But look, if you want to avoid some back pain whilst still kind of stimulating glutes and hamstrings, then dumbbells, or just slightly modifying that to change that grip to around your thighs a little bit more, can be another really good option. Next thing you could try are some single leg variations. Now, I really like a supported single leg RDL. I'm going to show you that now, and then I'm going to show you another version of it using a cable. So for this one, I like more like an ipsilateral variation. So using that same leg as your arm with the dumbbell in it, or kettlebell if you want to. Grab a little bit of support from a rack. Obviously, I'm using a cable column here, and all we're going to do is push that hip back, get nice and long with that leg, trace that down our thigh, that dumbbell, and then return to the top. Really try and get that glute contraction at the top as well. I don't mind a little bit of a chin tuck, a little bit of kind of upper back, bit of thoracic rounding as well. But I really like this to load those glutes and hamstrings. Single leg, so obviously get the advantages of using unilateral exercises with that single leg strength and stability, with avoiding back pain at the same time. I do actually have a client right now who does have an issue with supported single leg variations, and she's actually benefited more from using a cable instead of a dumbbell. So I'm going to show you a cable variation. Now, as I said, this is just from personal experience. The dumbbell with this particular person was causing a little bit of back fatigue. She's had some existing conditions in her back, and we found a cable, she doesn't feel it as much, or it's almost non-existent, the pain. So she's able to use a cable more consistently, increase the load over weeks, get stronger, and then eventually might be able to try some other variations that kind of push that back a little bit more. So I'll show you that cable variation now. I have actually shared a few different variations of these before, using different legs, using slightly different setups with the angle of the bench, but I'm going to share with you what actually we're using in the real world right now with this particular client, just because, again, real world, right? We're talking about real people here, and this is something that actually has helped them or is helping them right now. So I'm going to pick up my cable set to its lowest point. With this one, I'm going to use a contralateral stance. So my arm that's got the load in and my working leg are opposite, so it's contralateral, okay? So I'm gonna take my same side leg to my arm with the load back on this one, and I'm just gonna grab a little bit of support through this bench in front of me, all right? So all I'm gonna do is get along with that back leg, and then drive that knee through just a little bit. It's not gonna be doing a lot, but I do feel it just gets a little bit more kind of posterior tilt at the top of that pelvis, which helps us contract that glute a little bit more, okay? So we're here, and to here. We're here and to here. And what you might notice as well is that cable is kind of coming slightly across my body a little bit. So if I show you from this angle here, that cable is actually kind of coming here. So instead of it coming in line here, it's actually coming slightly across my body, which allows me to kind of resist that hip hike that it'd otherwise be forcing me out to do, all right? So I get a little bit more kind of glutes engagement just through having that angle that makes it kind of come slightly out, okay? So again, that's another option that you can use. You can use this with the same side leg. If you're doing it with the same side leg, I would turn the bench around. It just tends to work a little bit better. You can also do it where you're not necessarily coming across the body, you're coming kind of more in a straight line. But as I always say, just tweak it a little bit to make sure it feels good for you. The best exercise is always the one that feels good for you, and you can increase load consistently over time. So another great option if you're experiencing back pain, a single leg RDL with some support. So when it comes to performing deadlifts back pain free, what we want to be thinking about is trying to emulate that movement pattern. Not all the time, but most of the time we're trying to emulate that movement pattern. So we're thinking about a hip hinge. And obviously there's a difference between loading our glutes and hamstrings through a hip hinge variation versus, say, hamstrings through like a knee flexion, like a hamstring curl variation. So we want to try to emulate that hip hinge pattern as much as we can, build it back up, get it strong, work the muscles in a similar manner so that eventually we can, if we want to, deadlift with a barbell again. A really good option for this can be a cable pull through. Now there are downsides to a cable pull through in that you can't handle much weight with them. They just kind of pull you back in position, or most people are just too strong. If you're like 250 pounds, like a 250 pound monster, then these aren't going to be doing much for you, okay? But for most people, they can work really well as like a supplementary exercise. But as I said, it depends on you. So cable pull through, I'm using ropes. I also quite like a cable row attachment, can work really well. So whatever's most comfortable for you in terms of that grip. I'm going to take a slightly wider stance than what I would do with a typical Romanian deadlift, turn my toes out a little bit. So it's almost like semi-sumo, really. I'm going to push my hips back. So you can see that hip hinge in action now, right? I'm hinging my hips like I would do in a deadlift and then driving through, okay? Unlike a deadlift, what's happening there is that it's more of like a horizontal load. So I've got most of that load here, okay? So if you look at the direction of the cable, it's coming through that way. So it's almost more similar to a hip thrust than it is a deadlift. So versus a deadlift where I'm here, and that load's coming down and I'm putting a lot of stress on my back, I'm not really getting a lot there. Instead, I'm getting most of that load in that shortened range in that glute at the top, some in my hamstrings at the bottom. So yes, it's not an ideal exercise, but it's one you can incorporate to help you build up to a more optimal exercise for glutes and hamstrings development. So cable pull-throughs, a good option. Give them a shot if you think they're going to work well for you, and there's something that at the end of the day allows you to get back to where you want to be. The final movement I want to show you is a back extension. I'm using a glute ham developer for this. So this kind of creates a more horizontal back extension, whereas you can use a standard back extension, which is kind of like a 45-degree angle. In this variation, you're getting a little bit more load towards the top. If you're using more like the 45-degree bench, which actually we can show you in just a second, you're getting a lot more load kind of mid-range. You lose a little bit in kind of that shortened range. So it depends kind of the range of motion you're trying to load. Both can be great options if you have low back pain. And again, just like the previous exercises, we're trying to develop strength in that hip hinge motion. We're targeting our glutes and hamstrings by doing so, all right? So in this variation, I've obviously got this just below the crease of my hip to allow me to get over as much as I can. And then here, I'm getting most of my load here, okay? So it's here, not a lot really going on there, most of that load there. I like to get a little bit more kind of thoracic rounding in here, trying to drive my hips into the bench to get more kind of a glute focus variation. But you can be a little bit more strict if you want to, more of a hip hinge, even kind of glutes and hamstrings motion. So I'm here to here, driving my thighs into the bench for more of a glutes focus variation. Obviously you can load that in various ways. I like to hold a dumbbell or a kettlebell, starting from the bottom, starting from the floor. I also quite like a resistance band, which works nicely if you attach it to something on the floor or you attach it around your bench. As you come up, obviously you've got increased load from that resistance band at the top, so it works quite well to load that shortened position at the top. So let me just show you that 45-degree bench with the back extension as well, and you can see the difference between the two of them. So this bench is more 45 degrees. I've got the pad set up so it's just below my hip crease. So just to show you the difference in these, I like to turn toes slightly out. Again, I like a more glutes focused kind of emphasis on this exercise. You can do more of a hamstrings focus. I program both, but for me personally, I like it more glutes. So toes slightly out, turned, a little bit of thoracic rounding, so chin tucked, round the shoulders out a little bit. That kind of helps lock off that lumbar. And all we're gonna do is there and drive our thighs into the pad, squeeze our glutes at the top. So it's here to here, all right? So whereas the horizontal variation, we do get a little bit more loading in kind of this range of motion, whereas we completely lost it in the other one, and the same at the bottom here. So we do get some loading here, and we do get kind of some loading here. So a 45-degree bench kind of covers all bases, whereas I would argue a more horizontal bench, like we showed on the glute ham a second ago, it kind of has more emphasis at the top, but none at the bottom. Regarding back pain, really both can kind of be advantageous. When we're talking about back pain, really what we want to be doing is strengthening glutes, strengthening core. Glutes are technically part of your core. Your core is technically any muscle that kind of influences that lumbar pelvic hip complex, which your glutes play a big part of. So when it comes to low back pain, I don't necessarily see things as having to strengthen your back. I see things as having to strengthen your glutes, strengthen your core. And obviously you can include core exercises within that as well. But mostly what we're talking about today are exercises that you can use that allow you to continue your development. So build your glutes, build your hamstrings, build that glute ham tie-in, etc., whilst avoiding pain, with a potential that you might be able to return to your barbell Romanian deadlifts at a certain point of time in the future, which will help you continue your development. Supplementary exercises to strengthen your core, and you can even talk about things like a reverse hyperextension. Love a reverse hyper bench. I see those more as like corrective type exercises that would kind of help strengthen the other tissues that those hip hinge variations that we haven't covered today would be able to do. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed today's video. A little bit different than what I normally do. in talking about back pain, but I do think it's something that a lot of people suffer with, myself included, and I did want to share just some useful tips. Obviously, just bear in mind, there's only so much I can kind of get across in one YouTube video. So if you do have any specific follow-up questions, then just drop them in the comments below, and I can cover like specific areas of those and reasons why you might have back pain, or specific reasons why you might use a certain exercise in future YouTube videos. This is kind of very top level today, just kind of going into some of those hinge variations that will help you get from where you are right now to ultimately where you want to be whilst avoiding pain. Just again, before we sign off on today's YouTube, just a reminder, my glutes and hamstrings guide and 8-week training plan is out now. Head to the link in the caption or link in bio, and you can access it and read more. All the coaches, top coaches, are talking about it. A lot of my bikini athletes are loving it, so make sure you do check that. Anyway, hope you enjoyed today's YouTube. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you soon.